As the size of the organization that they're leading grows over time, a lot of leaders tend to hit a wall where they wake up one morning with the realization that the same approaches that worked really well for a smaller team have suddenly become diminishingly effective. And for most leaders, that seems to happen at around 40 to 50 people. If you don't adapt and start to lead a little bit differently before reaching this stage, you might find yourself spending an awful lot of your time dealing with infighting, confusion, bad behavior, and a lot of things that really be best avoided. In this episode, I'm going to explain a little bit why I think that step function seems to happen at around 40 to 50 people, what the risks of it are, and what you can do to get in front of it and mitigate that kind of thing from happening to you. This one's called Scaling Leadership, Tribes, Troublemakers, and the Rule of 40. This is Lead and Win the Room, and I'm Russ Patterson. Okay, so the rule of 40 that we're going to talk about in this episode is not about profit margin plus growth rate. This is a different rule of 40. It's about the organizational threshold at which most leaders find that they need to adapt their leadership style in important ways, because if they don't, that's the break point where things start to happen that are very undesirable, like tribalism, self-righteous behavior, conflict, churn, and regretted attrition. And the good news is that you can avoid all of these things by getting in front of them and making just some simple changes to your leadership style. Specifically, three things. Number one, you're going to focus a lot more on communications and goals, be a lot more thoughtful and structured in the way that you approach those things. Number two, you're going to spend some of your time being on the watch for and stamping out the tribalism that will inevitably occur. And number three, you're going to watch out for your big hiring mistake, because around 40 or 50, I tell you probably made one. You know, I've led a company with 600 employees, and I've led businesses where I could have fit everyone for an all hands meeting in my car and just about everything in between. And from my experience and from the experiences of some of the other leaders that I've met or mentored over the years, I can tell you that there's really a lot more in common between leading a team of 40 or 50 people and leading a team of 500 or 600 people than there is between leading a team of 40 plus people and leading a team of, say, 5 or 10. There's a big change that seems to happen around 40. And why does that happen? It's as if there's a human limitation that some of us reach or start to reach at around 40, where we've kind of hit up against the limit of the number of people that we can comfortably know, that we can comfortably communicate and connect with. And when you start finding yourselves in situations with 40 plus people, it starts to be a little bit overwhelming, at least for some people, and that starts to change behaviors a little bit. There are lots of people that can handle hundreds of close connections in their world. But for most of us, we have this intense need to be part of a group, whether that's a team at work or some other kind of social group. But if that group that we're part of starts to be 40 plus, we start to feel a little bit different about the security of our membership in that group. And one of the things that we'll do subconsciously is we'll start to form our own smaller groups, right? And that can take the form of, in an organization, infighting, tribalism, people throwing rocks at each other, things that you really want to avoid. All right, let's start with communications and goal setting. As your team reaches 40 plus, it's imperative that you be a lot more deliberate and thoughtful in the way that you prepare and structure your communications for your team. And the reason for that is, more than anything, if you're speaking to a group 40 plus, I don't care how compelling a speaker you are. When you're speaking to 40 plus, someone isn't listening, someone isn't paying attention, almost guaranteed, or someone thinks they're listening, but they're missing the point. And as your team gets larger and larger, this is more and more likely to happen, even if your team is really great. The way to get in front of that is to simplify your communications. Simplify them a lot. Repeat the key messages a lot. Make sure that you're using more visual aids and that your slides are simpler and clearer. goals are increasingly important as your team gets larger and larger, because goals are your command and control system, right? In the absence of you being present to observe everything that's going on, which becomes impossible, right? At 40 plus, people need to be able to fall back on what they already understand. And if they already understand the mission and the purpose of the company really well, if they already understand the guidelines of the way that you want people on your team to work and interrelate and the values that you hold up, and if people understand their organizational objectives really clearly, the number that they're trying to drive and how that connects in to that purpose, well, in the absence of direction, you can count on those people to make pretty good decisions, right? Because they understand where you're trying to get to and how you want people to get there. All right, let's talk about keeping your eyes peeled for tribalism. The symptoms of it are your employees saying things to you like, those idiots in such and such department don't know what they're doing, self-righteous kind of behavior, infighting, and understand that some of this is natural and it comes from sort of socially driven behavior as teams become larger in size. So you can mitigate it somewhat by being aware of that limitation. If you are leading a very large team, it's maybe a single tier of people that do the same thing, and it's 40 plus in size, well, you can bet your bottom dollar that tribes are going to start to form. So rather than let those tribes be formed on a random sort of Lord of the Flies basis, you can get in front of it by being thoughtful about dividing your part of the organization up into squads or teams, teams of your own design, teams that are balanced out, that have different perspectives and points of view embedded in them. You can foster healthy competition and meet people's social need to feel part of a smaller bite-sized team while still having them fit into a larger organization. Even having done that, though, it is still inevitable as your team gets larger and larger that certain pockets of self-righteousness and a certain amount of rock throwing will happen. And the way to handle that is keep your eyes peeled for it, and anywhere that you observe it or its symptoms is to wade in and to bring people back through the purpose and the ways of working and your values as an organization. And in doing that, you can bring people back to the way you want them to interact with other teams and with people on their own team. Back when I worked at eBay, I reported in for a little while to a really brilliant senior VP named Brian Sue. And I remember when he was stamping out tribalism, one of the things that he used to say to people was, I'm challenging you to figure out where the high road is and to get on it. And I've used that same approach, thank you, Brian, so many times in sorting through conflicts with teams. And that's like just a magic phrase that gets everybody to the right place in my personal experience. Okay, so we've talked about communication and goal setting, and we've covered stamping out tribalism. There's one more topic on the list, and that is to be on the lookout for the hiring mistake that odds are you've probably made. And once you get to 40 plus, no matter how good you are at hiring, let's face it, some people are really good at interviewing, but not at much else. Sometimes you think you're hiring one kind of person, and it turns out that you've hired another kind of person. Sometimes it becomes clear that someone on your team probably isn't really very well aligned with the mission and purpose of the business, the way they want people to work, what your values are, and so forth. And once you find that mistake, you owe it to yourself, to your investors, to all of the other people on the team to correct that mistake and to do it courageously and as quickly as you can. So don't be complacent. Don't be overconfident. Everybody thinks they're great at hiring, but if you're really honest, when you get to 40 plus, there is probably a suboptimal person on the team lurking somewhere, and just you got to keep your eyes peeled at that point. There's nothing better, in fact, you can do for morale than to manage your team as a meritocracy, and specifically to manage out people that don't fit as quickly as you can. So that's it for this episode. I hope you found it useful. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, reshare. All those things are good. This has been Lead 'em Win the Room, and I'm Russ Patterson.